will die. Surrender your life to me and I will end your pain.
The late Third Era was a period of remarkable religious ferment and creativity. The upheavals of the reign of Uriel the 21st were only the outward signs of the historical forces that would eventually lead to the fall of the Septim dynasty. The so-called dragon break was first proposed at this time by a wide variety of cults and fringe sects across the empire, connected only by a common obsession with the events surrounding Tiber Septim's rise to power, the founding myth, if you will, of the Septim dynasty. The basis of the dragon break doctrine is now known to be a rather prosaic error in the timeline printed in the otherwise authoritative Encyclopaedia Tamrielica, first published in 3E12 during the early years of Tiber Septim's reign. At that time, the archives of Alinor were still inaccessible to human scholars, and the extant records from the Alessian period were extremely fragmentary. The Alessians had systematically burned all the libraries they could find, and their own records were largely destroyed during the War of Righteousness. The author of the Encyclopaedia Tamrielica was apparently unfamiliar with the Alessian year, which their priesthood used to record all dates. We now know this refers to the length of the long vision trances undertaken by the high priestess, which might last anywhere from a few weeks to several months. Based on analysis of the surviving trance scrolls, as well as murals and friezes from Alessian temples, I estimate that the Alessian order actually lasted only about 150 years, rather than the famous 1008 years given by the Encyclopaedia Tamrielica. The mystery of the millennial-plus rule of the Alessians was accepted but unexplained until the spread of the Lorcan cults in the late Third Era, when the doctrine of the dragon break took hold. Because this dating and explanation was so widely held at the time and then repeated by historians down through today, it has come to have the force of tradition. Recall, however, that the Third Era historians were already separated from the Alessians by a gulf of more than 2,000 years. And history was still in its infancy, relying on the few archives from those early days. Today, modern archaeology and paleonumerology have confirmed what my own research in Alessian dating first suggested, that the dragon break was invented in the late Third Era, based on a scholarly error, fueled by obsession with eschatology and Numidianism, and perpetuated by scholarly inertia.
You will suffer greatly! Die, Victor! Die, wretches! You inward.
The castle would hold. No matter the forces, the walls of Cascabel Hall would never fail, but that was small consolation for Menegar. He was hungry. In fact, he had never been so hungry. The well in the atrium of the fortress supplied him with enough water to hold there until the Fourth Era, but his stomach reminded Menegar minute to minute that he needed food. The wagon-load of supplies mocked him. When his army, the forces of the King of Solitude, had left Cascabel Hall, and he had manned the battlements as the rear guard to protect their retreat, they had left a wagon behind to supply him with enough food for months. It was not until the night after they left that he inspected the larder and found that nothing edible was in the wagon. Trunk after trunk was filled with netch armour from the army's incursion into Morrowind. Apparently, his Nord confederates had assumed that the lightly opaque material was hard tack in aspic. If the Dunmer whose caravan had been raided knew about this, they would never be able to stop laughing. Menneger thought that his fellow mercenary and kinswoman Erin would have found this amusing as well. She had spoken with great authority about netch leather, being an expert of sorts on light armour, but she had made a point to mention that it could not be eaten like other leather in occasions of hardship. It was a pity she couldn't be there to enjoy the irony, Menneger thought savagely. She had returned to Morrowind even before the king's army had left, preferring a life as a wanted fugitive to a free existence in the cold of Skyrim. All the weeds in the courtyard had been devoured by the rearguard's 16th day manning Cascabel Hall. The entire castle had been scoured, rotten tubers in the mulch pile found and consumed, a dusty bouquet in the countess's bedchamber eaten, almost every rat and insect but the most cunning infesting the castle walls had been tracked down and gobbled up. The castellan's chambers, filled with acrid, inedible law books, had yielded up a couple crumbs of bread. Menneger had even scraped moss from the stones. There was no denying it. He would be dead from starvation before his army returned to break the ranks of the enemies who surrounded the fortress. "The worst part," said Menneger, who had taken to talking to himself on only the second day alone in the castle, "is how close sustenance is. A vast arbour of golden apples stretched acre after acre near the castle walls. The sunlight cast a seductive gleam on the fruit, and the cruel wind carried sweet smells into Cascabel to torture him. Like most Bosmer, Menneger was an archer. He was a master of long and medium-distance fighting, but in close quarters, as he would be if he dared to leave the castle and enter the enemy camp in the arbour, he knew he would not last long. At some point he knew he would have to try, but he had been dreading the day. It was upon him now. Menneger put on the netch armour for the first time, feeling the powdery, almost velvet texture of the rendered leather against his skin. There was also a barely perceptible throb, which he recognized as the remnant nematocysts of the netch's venomous flesh, still tingling months after its death with domesticated poison. The combination made him feel energized. Erin had described the sensation perfectly, just as she had explained how to defend himself while wearing netch leather armour. Under cover of night, Menneger crept out of the back gate of the castle, locking it behind him with a rather cumbersome key. He made for the arbour as quietly as he could, but a passing sentry, coming behind a tree, saw him. Remaining calm, Menneger did as he remembered Erin had instructed, only moving after the attack had been launched. The sentry's blade glided against the armour and knocked to the left, throwing the young man off balance. That was the trick, as he understood it. You had to be prepared to be hit and merely move with the blow, allowing the membranous armour to divert the injury away. "Use your enemy's momentum against him," as Erin used to say. There were several more close encounters in the arbour, but each swing of an axe and each thrust of a sword found purchase elsewhere. With handfuls of apples, Menneger ran the gauntlet back to the castle. He locked the back gate door behind him and fell into an orgy of eating. For week after week, the Bosmer stole out to gather his food. The guards began anticipating his raids, but he kept his schedule irregular and always remembered when attacked to wait for the blow, accept it, and then turn. In such a way, he lived and survived his lonely vigil in Cascabel Hall. 4 months later, as he was preparing for another seizure of apples, Menneger heard a loud clamour at the front gate. Surveying the group from a safe distance on the battlements, he saw the shields of the King of Solitude, his ally the Count of Cascabel, and their enemy the King of Farron. Evidently, a truce had been called. Menneger opened the gates, and the combined armies flooded the courtyard. Many of the knights of Farron sought to shake the hand of the man they had named the Shadow of the Arbour. expressing their admiration at his defensive skills and apologizing good-naturedly for their attempts to slay him. Only doing their job, you know. "There's hardly a apple left on the vines," said the King of Solitude. "Well, I started on the edges and worked my way in," explained Menegar. "I brought back extra fruit to tempt the rats of out of walls, so I could have a little meat as well." "We've spent the last several months working out the details of the truce," said the king. "Really quite exhausting. In any rate, the Count will be taking back possession of his castle now, but there is a small detail we need to work out. You're a mercenary, and as such responsible for your own expenses. If you had been a subject of mine, things might be different, but there are certain old rules of law that must be respected." Menegar anticipated the strike. "The problem is," the king continued, "you've taken a good deal of the Count's crops while here. By any reasonable computation, you've eaten an amount equal to and likely exceeding your mercenaries' wages. Obviously, I would not want to penalize you for the excellent job you've done defending the castle in uncomfortable circumstances, but you agree that it's important that we observe the old rules of law, don't you?" "Of course," replied Menegar, accepting the blow. "I'm delighted to hear that," said the king. "Our estimation is that you owe the Count of Cascabel 37 imperial gold, which I will gladly pay to myself with interest after the autumn-tide harvest," said Menegar. "There is more left on the vine than you suggest." The kings of Solitude and Farron and the Count of Cascabel stared at the Bosmer. "We agreed to abide to the strictest old rules of law, and I've had time to read a great many books over the time you were making your truce. In 3E 246, during the reign of Uriel IV, the Imperial Council, in an attempt to clear up some questions of property rights in Skyrim during those chaotic days, decreed that any man without a liege who occupied a castle for more than 3 months would be granted the rights and titles of that estate. It's a good law, of course, meant to discourage absent and foreign landlords." Menegar smiled, feeling the now familiar sensation of a glancing strike diverting. "By the rule of law, I am the Count of Cascabel. The rearguard's sons still hold the title of Count of Cascabel, and he grows the finest, most delectable apples in the Empire."
Suffer!
The Scripture of Love. The formulas of proper Velothi magic continue. The Scripture of Love. Last Seed, 2920, Mournhold, Morrowind. They were gathered in the Duke's courtyard at twilight, enjoying the smell and warmth of a fire of dry branches and bitter green leaves. Tiny embers flew into the sky, hanging for a few moments before vanishing. "I was rash," agreed the Duke soberly, "but Lorcan had his laugh, and all is well. The Morag Tong will not assassinate the Emperor now that my payment to them is at the bottom of the inner sea. I thought you had made some sort of a truce with the Daedra princes." "What your sailors called a Daedra may not have been one," said Sotasil. "Perhaps it was a rogue battle mage, or even a lightning bolt that destroyed your ship. The Prince and the Emperor are en route to take possession of Lambassi as our truce agreed. It is certainly typical of the Cyrodiil to assume that their concessions are negotiable, while ours are not." Vivek pulled out a map. "We can meet them here, in this village to the northwest of Lambassi, Vvardenfell. But will we meet them to talk?" asked Almalexia, "or to make war?" No one had an answer to that. 15 Last Seed, 2920, Vvardenfell, Morrowind. A late summer squall blew through the small village, darkening the sky except for flashing of lightning which leapt from cloud to cloud like acrobats. Water rushed down the narrow streets ankle deep, and the prince had to shout to be heard by his captains, but a few feet away from him. "There's an inn up ahead. We'll wait there for the storm to pass before pressing on to Lambassi." The inn was warm and dry and bustling with business. Barmaids were rushing back and forth, bringing grief and wine to a back room, evidently excited about a famous visitor, someone who was attracting more attention than the mere heir to the Empire of Tamriel. Amused, Ulick watched them run until he overheard the name of Vivek. "My Lord Vivek," he said, bursting into the back room. "You must believe me. I knew nothing about the attack on Black Gate until after it happened. We will, of course, be returning it to your care forthwith. I wrote you a letter to that effect at your palace in Balmora, but obviously you're not there." He paused, taking in the many new faces in the room. "I'm sorry. Let me introduce myself. I'm Julik Cyrodiil." "My name is Almalexia," said the most beautiful woman the prince had ever seen. "Won't you join us?" "Sotha Sil," said a serious-looking Dunmer in a white cloak, shaking the prince's hand and showing him to a seat. "Indoril Brindisi Dorum, Duke Prince of Mournhold," said the massively built man next to him as he sat down. "I recognize that the events of the last month suggest at best that the Imperial army is not under my control," said the prince after ordering some wine. "This is true. The army is my father's." "I understood that the Emperor was going to be coming to Lambassi as well," said Almalexia. "Officially he is," said the prince cautiously. "Unofficially, he's still back in the Imperial city. He's met with an unfortunate accident." Vivek glanced the Duke quickly before looking at the prince. "An accident?" "He's fine," said the prince quickly. "He'll live, but it looks like he'll lose an eye. It was an altercation that has nothing to do with the war. The only good news is that while he recovers, I have the use of his seal. Any agreement we make here and now will be binding to the Empire, both in my father's reign and in mine." "Then let's start agreeing," smiled Almalexia. 16. Last Seed, 2920, Roth-Naga, Cyrodiil. The tiny hamlet of Roth-Naga greeted Kasir with its colourful houses perched on a promontory overlooking the stretch of the Rothgarian mountain plain and high rock beyond. Had he been in a better mood, the sight would have been breathtaking. As it was, he could only think that in practical terms, a small village like this would have meagre provisions for himself and his horse. He rode down into the main square, where an inn called the Eagle's Cry stood. Directing the stable boy to house and feed his horse, Kassir walked into the inn and was surprised by its ambience. A minstrel he had heard play once in Gilverdale was performing a jaunty old tune to the clapping of the mountain men. Such forced merriment was not what Kassir wanted at that moment. A glum Dunmer woman was seated at the only table far from the noise, so he took his drink there and sat down without invitation. It was only when he did so that he noticed that she was holding a newborn baby. "I've just come from Morrowind," he said rather awkwardly, lowering his voice. "I've been fighting for Vivek and the Duke of Mournhold against the Imperial army. A traitor to my people, I guess you'd call me." "I am also a traitor to my people," said the woman, holding up her hand, which was scarred with a branded symbol. "It means that I can never go back to my homeland." "Well, you're not thinking of staying here, are you?" laughed Kassir. "It's certainly quaint, but come wintertide, there's going to be snow up to your eyelashes. It's no place for a new baby. What is her name?" "Bosriel. It means beauty of the forest." "Where are you going?" "Dwinnen, on the bay in High Rock. You're welcome to join me. I could use the company." He held out his hand. "Kassir Whitley." "Turala," said the woman after a pause. She was going to use her family's name first, as is tradition, but she realized that it was no longer her name. "I would love to accompany you. Thank you." 19. Last Seed, 2920. Ald Lambasi, Morrowind. 5 men and 2 women stood in the silence of the great room of the castle, the only sound the scrawl of quill on parchment and the gentle tapping of rain on the large picture window. As the prince set the seal of Cyrodiil on the document, the peace was made official. The Duke of Mournhold broke out in a roar of delight, ordering wine brought in to commemorate the end of 80 years of war. Only Sota Sil stood apart from the group. His face betrayed no emotion. Those who knew him best knew he did not believe in endings or beginnings, but in the continuous cycle of which this was but a small part. "My prince," said the castle steward, unhappy at breaking the celebration, "there is a messenger here from your mother, the Empress. He asked to see your father, but as he did not arrive..." Julek excused himself and went to speak with the messenger. "The Empress does not live in the Imperial City?" asked Vivek. "No," said Almalexia, shaking her head sadly. "Her husband has imprisoned her in Black Marsh, fearing that she was plotting a revolution against him. She is extremely wealthy and has powerful allies in the Western Colovian estates, so he could not marry another or have her executed. They've been at an impasse for the last 17 years, since Julek was a child." The prince returned a few minutes later. His face betrayed his anxiety, though he took troubles to hide it. "My mother needs me," he said simply. "I'm afraid I must leave at once. If I may have a copy of the treaty, I will bring it with me to show the Empress the good we have done today, and then I will carry it on to the Imperial City, so it may be made official." Prince Julek left with the fond farewells of the 3 of Morrowind. As they watched him ride out into the rain-swept night south towards Black Marsh, Vivek said, "Tamriel will be much healed when he has the throne." 31. Last Seed, 2920. Dorsa Pass, Black Marsh. The moon was rising over the desolate quarry, steaming with swamp gas from a particularly hot summer as the prince and his 2 guard escort rode out of the forest. The massive piles of earth and dung had been piled high in antiquity by some primitive, long-dead tribe of Black Marsh, hoping to keep out some evil from the north. Evidently, the evil had broken through at Dorsa Pass, the large crack in the sad, lonely rampart that stretched for miles. The black, twisted trees that grew on the barrier cast strange shadows down, like a net tangling. The prince's mind was on his mother's cryptic letter, hinting at the threat of an invasion. He could not, of course, tell the Dunmer about it, at the very least, until he knew more and had notified his father. After all, the letter was meant for him. It was its urgent tone that made him decide to go directly to Gideon. The Empress had also warned him about a band of former slaves who attacked caravans going into Dorsa Pass. She advised him to be certain to make his imperial shield visible, so they would know he was not one of the hated Dunmer slavers. Upon riding into the tall weeds that flooded through the pass like a noxious river, the prince ordered that his shield be displayed. "I can see why the slaves use this," said the prince's captain. "It's an excellent location for an ambush." Julek nodded his head, but his thoughts were elsewhere. What threat of invasion could the Empress have discovered? Were the Akaviri on the seas again? If so, how could his mother from her cell in Castle Gervasi know of it? A rustle in the weeds and a single sharp human cry behind him interrupted his ponderings. Turning around, the prince discovered that he was alone. His escort had vanished. The prince peered over the stretch of the moonlit sea of grass, which waved in almost hypnotic patterns to the ebb and flow of the night wind billowing through the pass. It was impossible to tell if a struggling soldier was beneath this system of vibrations, a dying horse behind another. A high, whistling wind drowned out any sound the victims of the ambush might be making. Julek drew his sword and thought about what to do, his mind willing his heart not to panic. He was closer to the exit of the pass than the entrance. Whatever had slain his escort must have been behind him. If he rode fast enough, perhaps he could outrun it. Spurring his horse to gallop, he charged for the hills ahead, framed by the mighty black piles of dirt. When he was thrown, it happened so suddenly he was hurtling forward before he was truly conscious of the fact. He landed several yards beyond where his horse had fallen, breaking his shoulder and his back on impact. A numbness washed over him as he stared at his poor dying steed, its belly sliced open by one of several spears jutting up just below the surface of the grass. Prince Julek was not able to turn and face the figure that emerged from the grass, nor able to move to defend himself. His throat was cut without ceremony. Miramor cursed when he saw the face of his victim more clearly in the moonlight. He had seen the Emperor at the Battle of Bodrum when he had fought in His Imperial Majesty's command, and this was clearly not the Emperor. Searching the body, he found the letter and a treaty signed by Vivek Almalexia Sota Sil and the Duke of Mournhold, representing Morrowind, and the Prince Julek Cyrodiil, representing the Cyrodiil Empire. "Curse my luck," muttered Miramor to himself and the whispering grass. "I've only killed a prince. Where's the reward in that?" Miramor destroyed the letter, as Zook had instructed him to do, and pocketed the treaty. At the very least, such a curiosity would have some market value. He disassembled the traps as he pondered his next step. Return to Gideon and ask his employer for a lesser reward for killing the heir. Move on to other lands. At the very least, he considered, he had picked up 2 useful skills from the Battle of Bodrum. From the Dunmer, he had learned the excellent spear trap, and abandoning the Imperial army, he had learned how to skulk in the grass. The year is continued in Hearthfire.
You claim to be the Nerevarine. You defy temple doctrine. The Order of the Watch calls you an agent of the Hail and welcome. Do you have any news? May you find all that you seek, traveler. You claim to be the Nerevarine. You defy temple doctrine. The Order of the Watch calls you an agent of the Emperor and an outlaw. Nesis Temple is the only shrine in Nesis. Pilgrims' Vivek's ash mask is a holy relic displayed within the shrine of the Nesis Temple. Pilgrims travel from all over Morrowind to view this sacred artifact. So good to see you. Praise Vivek.
There it is again.